call Tracy Ann Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Tracy Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been an interesting debate sitting in the House, particularly the interaction between the government members and the Labor Party members, trying to figure out who took the longest to get nowhere. I just want to quote a few statements with regard to this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, please. This is what's been said previously about this bill. This bill languished under the last administration, whereas this government is committed to fulfilling its legislative responsibilities. They just never got around to doing it. This is an unfair situation for Radio New Zealand, and it shows that the previous minister had other priorities. It's highly desirable that the related legislation process be concluded as soon as possible to ensure that Radio New Zealand can operate an up-to-date and clear public service mandate. The adoption into legislation of the revised charter supports this government's manifesto commitment to provide certainty in relation to the operations of public service broadcasters. That was the minister at the time, Honourable Dr. Coleman of the National Government back in 2009. Now, much has been made by the government benches that the original review around the content of the charter was made in 2005 with 135 submissions at the time, and that the Commerce Commission, Commerce Select Committee at that time considered those submissions and then came up with a few tweaks and so on for the charter, which then came back to this House, which then needed to be turned into legislation, which then went back to the Commerce Committee. And so there's been much made by the National Government in an attempt to override what they knew was going to be a drumming when they came into this House with this bill. And the reason why they were going to get a drumming, and they knew it was, because those statements were made in 2009 about how important this piece of legislation was. They were made by the minister, how terrible it was that it had been left for 3 years and nothing had happened. And here we are 6 years later, under a national government, now looking at the same piece of legislation, which fascinatingly, apparently, even though it has changed almost not a jot since 2009, is now apparently, according to the speakers from the government benches, completely going to update and modernise Radio New Zealand for the new digital age and for the many media platforms that are available now. Now that's a miracle. That's a miracle that when something just sits on the order paper for 6 years, suddenly it becomes the answer for the future. Maybe we should just leave everything on the order paper and then eventually it will morph itself into the future. Well, that would be lovely. But you know, like I know, Mr. O'Connor, that is not going to happen. But let's just take some other quotes. Let's just take some other quotes. This speaker on this bill said the following: "I commend Dr. Coleman for his courage to take action over this bill, a bill that was an example of the Labor Party resting on its laurels and not getting legislation through this House. It is a brave move by Dr. Coleman to take this legislation on and move it quickly through the House." So what happened to that courage that started in 2009 and now we're here in 2015? What happened? What happened, Mr. Bishop? What happened to the courage? Did all the courage leave the House when the members of the original Commerce Commission that looked at this bill left with it? Is that what happened, Mr. Bishop? There is no more courage left to drive such important legislation through this House, and that's why it's been 6 years sitting on this order paper. And it fascinates me, Mr. Speaker, that we have had National Party members stand and passionately argue how important public broadcasting service is for New Zealand. And it absolutely is. New Zealand First absolutely agrees that there must be an independent, non-commercial public broadcaster for New Zealand. And we agree that we believe, as the Green Party spokesperson said, we agree that there should be a public broadcasting non-commercial television station. And what's very, very interesting is that Ms. Collins holds her head in her hands. Now she sits on the edge Education and Science Select Committee. What a shame she wasn't there when she was a minister, because she would have heard her government members on that select committee also raving and being very passionate about learning media at the time and their opportunity to create digital content and visual and in radio form that would retain the voice of New Zealand across our public service radio. But Ms Collins wasn't there and now holds her head in her hands in a backbench position. So the reason why, and of course what happened was this government, on the one hand, they said that this was a wonderful thing and learning media had this opportunity and could keep the New Zealand voice there for New Zealanders, and then they drove it out of business by opening it up to 100% competition, while at the same time having their hands tied behind their backs with regard to what it had to provide for the government for free. So it's fascinating to listen to the government members stand and argue how much they believe in public broadcasting, how much they believe that this institution should remain and should be well-founded. They haven't funded it properly for the last 7 years, but today, after 6 years of this being on the order paper, so the Radio New Zealand not having technically a legal charter, or at least not a charter that's been reviewed in the modern age, and not increasing its funding in any other way, they have decided that it's incredibly important and that they must push it through. It'll be interesting to see what's in the budget. Is there any money, Mr Bishop, in the budget for Radio New Zealand? Is there any money, Mr Bishop? Will you finally give public broadcasting, for all the statements made, will that government finally give public broadcasting any more money? Is that a no, Mr Bishop? Is that a no? Is that a no, Mr Bishop? That's a no. There you go. So unfortunately for Radio New Zealand and those people in New Zealand who believe in public broadcasting, do not look to this government to try and fund it appropriately. They'll talk the talk in the middle of the night. They'll talk the talk, but they won't walk the walk. So don't expect anything inside this budget. The only other thing New Zealand First would say is that it is incredibly important that we keep an independent voice. But is Radio New Zealand currently as independent and informative as it should be for the New Zealand public? And I think one needs to go and have a look, and we challenge the broadcasters themselves to go and have a look. Are they unbiased in their political reporting, for example? Do they gain comment from across the whole of the political spectrum on issues that are of importance? And we would challenge them to go and have a look at the percentages of their reporting and the percentage of comment that they seek from political party spokesperson on issues that are of importance, important enough for them to put on the radio station and make programs about, the TPP, for example. And yet, when political parties, they appear to be picking and choosing political parties with which to gain a bias. And New Zealand First would argue that there are voices in the political arena that New Zealanders need to hear on issues like the TPP, on issues like foreign investment, on issues that this government has been trying to push through again and again, and through a misrepresentation to the New Zealand people. So we would suggest that it is not only timely for this organisation to have its charter passed through here so that it can actually provide comprehensive, independent, accurate, impartial and balanced regional, national and international news and current affairs, and we would encourage them to seek comment from every political party inside this House on a regular basis in an apolitical manner. Don't be frightened of the National Party. Make sure that you keep to the charter comments that are here. We would absolutely support that this needs to be passed now so that the Radio New Zealand can actually get on with their business. We also would support that if there are any crumbs left in the budget, Mr Bishop, perhaps we could throw a few to Radio New Zealand, but otherwise, New Zealand First joins with the other opposition parties saying we actually believe in public broadcasting and we would fund it to the level it should be appropriately funded at.